Good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us tonight. Please join me in saying the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Ms. Sugars, will you please take roll call?
Yes. Mrs. Arroyo?
Here.
Ms. Friedel?
Here.
Mr. Goodwin? Mr. Goodwin?
I don't see.
Mrs. Matlack?
Here.
Mrs. Neary?
Here.
Mr. Avadia?
Here.
Mrs. Schultz?
Here.
Mrs. Tong?
Here.
Mrs. Seidel?
Here. Okay, again, thank you for joining us this evening. Our first order of business is we have some board recognition tonight, so I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Malash to tell us about the East Robotics team that we will be recognizing this evening.
Thank you, Mrs. Seidel. I'm very excited that we can honor one of the many, or one group of the many students who are involved in the Cherry Hill High School East Robotics team. As you all have heard, because we've had the discussions at the board meeting a number of times, we have a very successful program over at High School East. Mr. Joe Dilks is the advisor of the program, and there are a lot of kids involved. We also have robotics programs in other schools in the district, but East is the one that had started with the first one, and has certainly been very successful. We had a team that qualified for the World Championships this year. In fact, for the last, I want to say it's 5 or 6 years consistently, at least one, if not more, of the teams from High School East have qualified to go to the World Championships. Unfortunately, because of the reality with everything being closed and dealing with the pandemic, the team was unable to travel to compete in the competition. The VEX Robotics folks, though, they took all of the scores from the nearly 800 teams from around the world that qualified for the championship, and they ran almost like a little fantasy tournament. And the J team from High School East came out as one of the co-world champions. See, there are always two teams because teams have to be able to partner up in order to win. So they are world champions through the virtual program that took place. So very exciting. So I would like to honor Mr. Dilks and the following students. And we have certificates for them, and we will mail these out to the kids. And the certificates say the Board of Education and Central Administration of Cherry Hill Public Schools proudly congratulate, I will name the students, for achievement as world champion virtual VEX robotics competition as members of the Cherry Hill High School East VEX Robotics J team. So first is William Yang. So congratulations to William. Second is Ariane Pradhan. Congratulations, Ariane. Next, Duwan Ham. Eric Gershon. Susrat Dubey. And finally, Ben Starkman. So congratulations to all of the students who participated in the robotics program this year, and especially to these world champions, a title to be able to carry with them forever. Thank you to Mr. Dilks for all of his work and for the work that the parents and family members have continued to do to support the program. Congratulations.
Congratulations. Thank you. Next, we have a presentation this evening. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Mahan and Ms. Sadwin to review our science assessment results.
Good evening, everyone. This evening, we will be presenting the science assessment results from the spring of 2019 from the Office of assessment, we have Ms. Val Smidge Sadwin, who is the coordinator of research and assessment. Val?
Great. Thank you, Dr. Mahan. Hello, everyone.
Hi.
Hi, Val.
Hello. Today, we want to present the NJSLA science results from the spring 2019. This presentation was prepared basically using the state-provided template with some reordering of the slides and with some slides added. The test, as we had said, was administered in spring 2019, and the results were first provided to the school districts on March 11th of this year. The presentation will be put on the website tomorrow morning, and the individual student results were uploaded to the parent portal this past Wednesday on May 6th. And if we can go to the next slide. Great, thank you. This is a state provided slide with a lot of information. Basically, it says that the test was administered to grades 5, 8, and 11, and there were a lot of different education groups collaborating to develop the tests. NJSLA Science is significantly different from the old NJ Ask because the current standards are more rigorous and because NJSLA Science focuses on the application of science knowledge and skills rather than the memorization of content. And then the state provided FAQs and they also provided the answers, so that's the section we'll go into now. First question, why did we need a new test? Basically, to measure the new, more rigorous state science standards. Why do the scores look different than in the past? The NJSLA Science Assessment reflects new expectations outlined in the new science standards, which focuses on the application of science knowledge and skills. The prior assessment, NJ Ask, emphasized the memorization of content. There were a couple other NJDOE FAQs. Basically, the science scores will be used in NJQSAC in the 21-22 school year, using the results from the spring 2021 administration next year's of the assessment, and NJSLA Science is not a graduation assessment requirement. Now we'll get into the individual student report. So these next few slides are included just to give you an idea of what the individual student report looks like. It looks very similar to the NJSLA, ELA, and math individual student reports. First, you have the introductory and student general information. Then the next slide, it goes further down on the page. Great. And here are the scores and the performance levels. If you look at this, the scores for this sample report show nice intervals for the cut scores, but the actual cut scores vary slightly by grade level. You can compare the student scores to the school, district, and state averages right on the individual student report. Then the next slide shows the second page or the back of the ISR and how the student performed on the different domains and practices, based on the 3 different levels shown in the legend, below, net, near, and met, and above expectations. Then this slide is further on down the second page, more of the domains and practices, scores, and resource, and then there are resources if you want to find out more. And that basically is the individual student report. This is a copy of the parent letter that went out with the scores on the parent portal on Wednesday, May 6th. Now we get into our results. First of all, there are 4 performance levels for science, where ELA and math have 5 levels. In science, levels 3 and 4 are considered proficient and above. These are the district performance levels compared to the state by grade level. At every grade level, the percentages of levels 3 or 4 are significantly higher than the state average. This is the number of students who took the NJSLA Science in spring of 2019. And now we get into the different school levels, different school results. And as I have been doing in the past, I am reporting all school results on an attending school basis. The elementary schools are split alphabetically on 2 pages so that you have a chance of reading it, with the district and state results at the bottom of each page. All but one elementary school has percentages of levels 3 or 4, which are above the state average. This is a similar exhibit, but for the middle schools. Carusi is below the state average. Beck and Rosa are well above for the percentage of students who were level 3 or 4, which is passing. And here's the high school exhibit. West and Alternative High School are below the state average, and East is above the state average. And then we move into the results by subgroup, by grade level, by race, ethnicity. As you can see from these graphs here, there are achievement gaps apparent between the different race and ethnicity groups. Here are the results for the students with IEP, economically disadvantaged, and for the English language learners. So in summary, NJSLA Science is significantly different from NJS because the current state science standards are more rigorous standards, and the NJSLA Science focuses on the application of science knowledge and skills rather than the memorization of content. Because of the increased rigor of the standards and the assessments, scores of this test were lower than the scores of the previous state science assessments. Also, district averages for every grade level were well above the state average. This is a state-provided slide discussing how schools and districts can use the data. No one wants to hear me read this one, so we'll give you just a minute to read it. And then finally, here are links for further resources if you want to find out more information about the assessment. So, are there any questions?
So I will go around the room, and I'm going to start with Mrs. Matlack, since we did discuss this in CNI earlier in the month. So Mrs. Matlack, any questions or comments?
Hi, thank you. We did discuss this, and I was just looking back at my notes, and some of the committee concerns were, of course, with Carusi and West's scores. And so there was a little bit of discussion about that. And Mrs. Sadwin, and Scott Goldthorpe were there and present at the meeting and talked a little bit about that. I'll let any other committee members who had specific questions, regarding those scores, which I'm sure the whole board has questions regarding that, to voice theirs. But I don't know if Mrs. Sadwin has anything that she would like to add regarding those 2 scores.
Actually, Ms. Matlack, thank you for the question. This is Dr. Mahan. I'm going to chime in here. You're welcome. We do have Mr. Goldthorpe on the call with us again this evening. He is the supervisor of science at the district level. Mr. Goldthorpe, if you could just bring your camera up. We also have Dr. Matt Covington, who is an assistant principal at Cherry Hill High School East, both of whom participate at the state level on the reiteration, I guess, of the science assessment as well as the science standards. Both have been actively involved at the state level and have been able to give information back to Cherry Hill Public Schools regarding the assessment. So Mr. Goldthorpe, if you could speak to the results and the differences in the results that we're seeing now, that would be great. And Dr. Covington, if you could follow up in regards to the change in the standards and what the test is now assessing, that would be great.
Sure. Good evening, everybody. My name is Scott Goldthorpe, Supervisor of Science for the district. So I guess one of the things that stood out for me, and especially after looking at the presentation again from Val, is the standards are quite different from the older standards that the NJ-ASC used to assess. I guess I want to give a little example here. So like a former NJ-ASC question might have been, you know, what's the formula for photosynthesis? And now on the NJSLA science, the question might give a data table and ask students to make a claim about where the mass from a tree comes from, given their science knowledge and the information in the data table. So the standards and the assessment have really ramped up in the level of rigor. A couple of the things that we're doing to meet those challenges here in Cherry Hill, as you recall, a few years ago, we started to implement the new science sequence at the high school level, which is students take biology as a freshman, chemistry as a sophomore, and physics as a junior. So actually, this is the first year that our juniors are all taking physics and have gone through that sequence. So I'm kind of upset to see that we're not going to have those assessment results from this cohort, because I think we would see some great improvement there, having students that, you know, had instruction in all of the standards. So that's a little background. I guess I'll pass it off to Dr. Covington to share a little bit of his expertise.
Evening, everyone. Dr. Covington, Assistant Principal over at East High School. The state of New Jersey has really been working towards and focusing on STEM areas. In fact, we also have been taking a look at the next generation science standards and making sure that any state assessment in the science area actually goes ahead and taps into one or more of the science standards throughout the biology, chemistry, physics, also earth science to a certain degree as well. We really have been working for Scott and I have been working with the state for the past 3 years now in creating viable questions that are able to be asked on future tests. And it is a shame, I will reiterate Scott's idea that it is a shame that we're not able to actually take a look at this specific cohort that has had now the whole sequence overall. If you take a look at the data that's being presented, please keep in mind that those students could not have had any physics knowledge taking that exam that was just presented for the results. So some of those individuals may have received their third lab science as an environmental science or some other lab science rather than physics. The new NJSLA science assessment is pretty much even across the board amongst the major 3 sciences, with also the earth science added in as well.
Thank you. Mrs. Matlack, before I move on to another C&I committee member, do you have any follow-up questions?
No, I don't. I appreciate, gentlemen, your explanation. It was helpful at the committee meeting to hear a little bit of that background. And as we discussed in the committee, it is a shame that we are not going to be able to have access to the test results for this cohort of kids who have had access to the whole sequence in order to be able to evaluate, how it's moving forward. I did like the detail that you gave us about some of the ways that you are assessing the curriculum and how it is helping our students move forward with these standards. So if maybe you could tell us just a little bit, very briefly, like you did at the committee meeting, what we're doing in district, in-house, to assess how our students are doing in these areas.
Sure. So we have created district benchmark assessments or unit assessments that we give all of our students in those science courses that we spoke of. So those assessments were created by our curriculum committee, which has teachers on it from both East and West, as well as alternative high school. So the assessments were created by the committee. All of the students in the classes take those assessments. And then when I meet with my curriculum committee, again, we actually look at sample student responses and scoring of those responses so we can kind of see how students are doing across the board and make some changes or modifications to the curriculum as necessary based on those student results.
Mr. Goldthorpe, could you also speak for a second to the elementary program with the implementation of Mystery Science and also the changes to the 8th grade science curriculum to have better articulation to the high school biology course?
Sure. So starting, I guess, 3 years ago, we implemented a curricular resource called Mystery Science at the elementary level. And I think that's really had a huge impact on our elementary students across the board. So in Mystery Science, it's kind of, as you could imagine with a title like Mystery Science, the lessons start out with some sort of mystery or question that is applicable to the students' lives, and then they go through a series of investigations and discussions to figure out the answer to those questions. So it's a pretty cool curricular resource, and we're excited to see that science is becoming more and more robust at the elementary levels. At the middle school level, we are piloting the Open SciEd curriculum unit specifically at Carusi, which is the state of New Jersey's model curriculum that they have developed in collaboration with some other folks across the country.
Thank you. Mrs. Arroyo, do you have any additional questions?
I just, in reviewing, thank you for presenting that information. It just, how has this changeover, and I don't know if this can be addressed now or if we can answer it later, with amongst the disparity that was shown, I think, hold on, let me see what slide number that was. 26, 23, I believe, by race ethnicity, and how that impact has changed and what some of the schools are doing, or what's not so much on the day-to-day, but how has that changed, or is there anything that's been implemented to help support some of that reduction in that disparity rate, or we're not there yet?
So we've started doing some work to reduce the achievement gaps that are present with the secondary science teachers, specifically in the NGSX professional learning that we've been doing, and making science more equitable and accessible to all students. Another aspect of that is incorporating student voice in our high school curriculum. So one of the things that we were going to do this spring was I was going to meet with student groups to see how they felt valued and their engagement in the science curriculum, to make sure that, as we're developing a program, that it's meeting the needs of all of our students and not just a certain subgroup of students. So we have begun that work. It is by no means done, but it's underway, and we're going to be able to use this data from the NJSLA science to move forward and continue that work.
Thank you.
And you're welcome. Mrs. Arroyo, I would also like to ask, Violet Katsikas is on the phone. She is another curriculum supervisor. Violetta can offer a concrete example to your question around equity regarding our ESL population. Ms. Katsikas, could you share?
Yes, so one of our special subgroups are ESL students, specifically at the secondary level. We have been able to, at High School East and High School West, have the ESL teachers push into the content area classes to work with our SIFE, our students who have limited or interrupted formal education, or beginning learners, to make the content curriculum more accessible. They co-plan with the teachers, introduce the vocabulary and pre-teach the vocabulary to the students, so when they enter the physics classes or the biology classes, they have the knowledge to be able to access the curriculum and to learn more successfully.
Thank you very much.
That sounds great.
Thank you, Ms. Katsikas. Ms. Friedel, did you have any questions?
I do. So thank you for your presentation once again. I do have a couple of statements and a couple of questions. So I think the most alarming thing to me is that our at-promise students are not doing well in science. And while I can appreciate the district averages, maybe above the state averages, it's not so much at the school-based level. You've shared a lot of information about secondary, what you're doing at the high school level, but the disparity between Carusi and Rosa and Beck is it's extreme. And I haven't really, if I've missed it, I apologize, but I haven't really heard a whole lot about what we are doing for these middle school students, as well as, the special populations. You just addressed the ELL piece, but we also have the economically disadvantaged and students with IEPs. So I guess in summary, my question is, what specifically is going on at the middle school level, and what are you doing with this data to evaluate the effectiveness of the programs for our, again, as I like to call them, at-promise students?
So, Ms. Friedel, thank you very much for your question. I'm going to turn it back over to Mr. Goldthorpe to respond to this question, but the one thing that I will say is that one of the reasons why Mr. Goldthorpe was speaking specifically about the mystery science program at the elementary level and the open SciEd units at the middle school is because we are looking to increase the articulation between the elementary school, middle school, and high school so that we can have a more comprehensive and robust program across the K-12 spectrum. But Mr. Goldthorpe, if you could just speak a little bit more to what is happening at the middle school, that would be great.
Sure. So I guess I'm actually super excited about the open SciEd work that is going on at Carusi. So this year in the 7th grade classrooms at Carusi, they piloted some of the open SciEd units. Like I said, open SciEd is a consortium of folks from across the country that New Jersey has adopted their model as the state model curriculum. So what's really cool about the curricular resources available with open SciEd is it creates these storylines and teaches science through the idea of a storyline. So if you can imagine, a unit starts off with some sort of perplexing situation or something that's going to get students to ask a lot of questions. And then those student questions are really what drives the investigations throughout the entire unit until students figure out, what they're supposed to figure out within that unit. I'll give you one example. the Mount Everest unit, and the big science ideas are really about plate tectonics and movement of plates and Earth's changing surface over time. But it starts off with a video of some campers on Mount Everest, and there's an earthquake, and they're trying to figure out, what's going on. So then what students end up doing is looking at a whole slew of earthquake data from the USGS, asking a ton of questions about how plates move, what are these plates, how can mountains form, and over time the students engage in investigations and figure out the answers to all those questions. And we've actually really seen the level of engagement in students in science classrooms skyrocket in those 7th grade classes. So it's super exciting to see, and I'm excited to kind of continue to focus on that to meet the needs of the middle school students.
Thank you so much. Can I ask a follow-up question to that?
Sure.
So when you say stories, are these actual stories that students, and I'm sorry for being very basic, but are these stories that the students are actually reading?
No, so it's the idea of a storyline is really it's coherent from the student perspective. So instead of a student reading a page in a textbook that talks about plate tectonics, and then turning the page and they're learning about another science topic that could be related to plate tectonics, or very well may just be the next page in that textbook chapter. The idea of this storyline is from the student's perspective. Their learning is coherent and sequential.
Okay, so are there special modifications or adaptations that are incorporated for, or say, example, the ELL students or students with disabilities?
There are. So built into the curricular resources are, I guess they call it kind of attending to equity, and provide resources for teachers to make sure that they're engaging all learners and being able to support all learners. One of those ideas to encourage all students to participate in science is we call them discussion circles or scientist circles. And in those discussions, there's group norms such as everybody's voice is valued, and we're working as a community to move forward. So it's really not about my individual learning. It's about the collective and moving everybody forward together. And then also the idea that every student brings different resources to the table to make sense of the world around them, and the resources that those students bring are valued. So I think incorporating a lot of this professional learning with teachers, as well as strong research-based curricular resources, we're going to start to see some movement on those NJSLA science scores.
I really thank you for taking the time to answer those questions, and I love your enthusiasm for science. So thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Ms. Friedel, and thank you, Mr. Goldthorpe. I'm going to ask Mr. Avadia if he has any questions.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. So a couple things. I think I heard a comment about like people hadn't gotten physics. I guess one thing that sticks out to me is these 11th graders for us are going off to college. Many of them we would want to do STEM careers and such like that, and yet for us, from a data perspective, this is where there's a fairly large drop-off, right? There's a 10-point bump that we get in Cherry Hill off the state in elementary and middle. We're more like 2 points when we get to high school. So a question I have is there something we can do to kind of at least continue our trajectory through 8th grade to get to 11th grade? Or is there something we should be doing earlier in the curricular level? That's one. Number two, I really think about our strategic goals. I know they're relatively new, but two, I think, really speak to this. One of them being a passion for learning. I think earlier this evening we recognized a group that's pretty passionate about science. to the tune of being world champions. I wonder what we can do outside the school framework, and perhaps, you know, curricularly as well. I mean, that's where we would start, obviously, but are there additional things? And then when we think about learning outside the classroom, are there resources? You know, I know there are college classes that are free. I know there are people with appetite. Can we connect students where they're doing some of the learning on their own based on their own interests? Especially, I'm just thinking, you know, as we sort of, you know, push off to post high school, you know, science is a big employer. So I don't know if we're thinking about any of those things, but I appreciate that we're monitoring this, that we're making some adjustments, and I think, you know, we need to kind of continue along those paths. But I really do appreciate the presentation today.
Thank you, Mr. Avadia. Mrs. Neary?
Yes, thank you. That presentation and those explanations were really helpful, especially regarding Carusi, which did really, really jump out. And I'm a big data person, so what I find interesting is when I'm looking at the scores from the elementary level, they're not alarmingly disparate amongst the elementary schools, except for one school which is clearly an outlier. That would seem to drive such a disparity by the time you get to the middle school level, just a few years later. So I'm wondering if we are looking at, as a district, the enrollment trends when we move into that open enrollment model when we come to the middle school and high school, and how does that align with the trends we saw from ethnicity and where those students are enrolled, and what we need to do, you know, if we're tracking that, to look at those impacts, because it does seem to change rather dramatically once we leave the elementary school.
Thank you, Mrs. Neary. Dr. Mahan, did you have anything you wanted to say there, or?
I was just going to chime in and say that we always look at trends in our data. In regards to open enrollment, we look at the data based on the school in which the student is enrolled. It is something that we could begin to track. I think Mrs. Neary's question speaks to some maybe different issues in terms of our district not necessarily connected to curriculum and instruction. So Dr. Malash, I don't know if you want to add anything in addition to my comments.
Sure. I would be happy to, Dr. Mahan. Yes, as we look at the enrollment across the three middle schools, you know, and where kids travel to after they leave fifth grade, there's definitely a different makeup at Carusi than there is at Rosa and that there is at Beck. That's just the reality of, you know, what those schools represent, you know, and who's attending those schools. There is always going to be, when you talk about a standardized test, there is always going to be a socioeconomic impact that is real, you know, and that is borne out, you know, in this as an example. I also want to say just briefly, because I know there's other board members that have a chance to ask questions, but I'm incredibly appreciative of the work that Val Sadwin and Faith Holmgren from our testing office did with the analysis and to put all this information together. You know, our curricularists, Dr. Mahan, Scott Goldthorpe, Allison McCartney, I think, is on the call, about Violetta Katsikis, you know, and where they are. One of my biggest frustrations with a report like this is the kids that took these test results are from last spring. They're literally a year old. You know, so a lot of the work and the growth of the work is in terms of what's gone on. You know, we are another year in. We would have had district kids, as Mr. Goldthorpe talked about, that would have taken the test this year. We have changed how we structure our curriculum, what our requirements are at the high school level. We don't know a whole lot of other districts. You know, the high school requirement for graduation is that children take 3 years of lab science. One of those has to be biology. We've designated here in Cherry Hill that the other two have to be chemistry and have to be physics. Most other school districts do not allow that. Or do not require that. There's a big difference, we believe, in what the impact is going to see. The change in the elementary curricula using Carusi as the pilot for the new curriculum, the state model curriculum that we're doing. Professional development's being provided. Mr. Goldthorpe literally was the president of the National Science Teachers Group, right? Like it's just been unbelievable with what the work that these folks have done. But is there a difference? Yes, there absolutely is a difference. Our responsibility then as a school district is what can we do to mitigate that? One of the other challenges is when you look at the elementary schools, not all subgroups are represented in all elementary schools. When you have a graduating class of 5th graders that may have 50 children or may have 40 children, not all the subgroups are going to be accounted for in that elementary school. When you get to the secondary level, especially at the middle school, you have a better chance that all subgroups are going to be accounted for. Still not necessarily always, but a better chance. And certainly when you get to the high school, based on the aggregate and the number of students that attend, you're going to have every subgroup is going to be represented. So there is a difference in terms of what we look at when all the children come together at the middle level or at the high school level in terms of what goes on. Again, just from the beginning of the comments, the other thing that we don't put into these slides, because they're our children, we educate them. We also know the longer that a child spends in our district, the more successful they are academically. There's absolutely a different level of transiency that exists at Carusi than does at Rosa, or than does at Beck, and that does at Rosa. Just based on the way that the schools are designated and what that looks like. We have more children that spend fewer years, that graduate from high school west, spend fewer years in our district, than graduate from high school east in terms of the number of years that spend in our district. And we've said this for years. We know the longer kids spend in the district, the more successful they are academically. So we're encouraging more people to come and at an earlier ages.
Thank you, Dr. Meloche. Mr. Goodwin?
Yes, can you hear me?
We can.
Oh, great. I obviously had some concerns about, especially when I looked at the disparity, when you look at the racial ethnicity breakdown. And one of the questions I do have, and I'm not sure how much this has been looked into, but has there been any kind of research, like looking at school districts that are successful, especially with races, Black and Hispanic, in terms of helping them achieve at the same level or similar levels in terms of other ethnicity groups? And when I say that, I guess the one school that keeps coming to my mind is Masterman in Philadelphia. I know it's a magnet school, and I understand that perspective, but it is a school that it seems like it has achieved a lot of its success. And I don't know if we've ever thought about looking at those type of schools to kind of see if there's anything that we can learn as a district from what they're doing, because they seem to be having success in the area, especially with minority students. Just a thought, and I don't know if you can further explain exactly what you think is going on, like with the 5th and 8th graders and all that, as far as the Black and Hispanic groups.
So I will chime in here again. We do compare ourselves to other districts, specifically when we are looking at students who are historically underrepresented. Mr. Goldthorpe, myself, other members of the curriculum instruction team have gone out and attended professional development hosted by many of the school districts in which historically underrepresented students are succeeding at a higher percentage rate. We also participate in visiting those sites to see exactly what is going on, live interactions with students and teachers, so that we can bring that research, anecdotal research, back to Cherry Hill Public Schools. Typically, when we are analyzing the data, we do not compare ourselves, as Cherry Hill Public Schools, we do not compare ourselves to a Masterman or to some of the districts, Mr. Goodwin, in which you're indicating, where students of color are high achieving.
would it be a disservice, or do you think we could learn anything from at least exploring? Because I when I look at them, one of the things I just noticed is that for them, it is a magnet school, but none of their students take anything except for advanced classes. So all their students take advanced classes. All their students are taking the top level and expected to perform at the top level, and therefore they rise to that occasion. Once again, I know it's magnet school, but it's those kind of things I'm wondering if we could learn and be able to bring some of those things back to the district. And I don't know, that's just kind of my thoughts on that.
Mr. Goodman, it's Joe again. So a couple of things. One, I think you asked some really good questions. And as Dr. Mahan talked about, these are things that we look at as a district, right? We want our kids to be more successful than they are. We believe that all of our kids can be incredibly successful, but we also know the reality of the difference between what children's experiences are before they get to the classroom has an impact on their experience in the classroom. We can make up for a lot of that, and we do. Again, the longer that we know that children are in school, we know that they're going to be more successful. Over the years, and Mrs. Savin, we can go back and take a bigger look at this. Typically over the years, Carusi Middle School sees more growth in the students that attend 6th grade through 8th grade than either of the other two middle schools, which is fantastic. We have other elementary schools where the expectation is that a child is going to grow more than 1 year in terms of their performance when they arrive to us. The challenge with comparing High School West to a Masterman High School is that it is a magnet school. And if the kids don't perform there, they don't get to go there anymore, and they have to go someplace else. That's not real. We serve all of the children who show up at our front door. We are fortunate that in our community, we have 2 incredible high schools where children go off to the colleges of their choice in both High School East and High School West. And that runs the gamut of Ivy League schools down to Camden County College and Burlington County College. And remember, Camden County College and Burlington County College are the 2 schools that take more of our graduates than any other single institutions, right? Because there's a financial reality that impacts our children as they come out. So there are things that certainly we can learn from those schools. The other thing, and it depends upon what level of research that you do, the most important thing in terms of a child's development during the course of an academic year is the teacher that's standing in front of the classroom. We have an incredible staff that works in our school district. They connect with kids, they listen to the kids, they make sure that the kids are engaged, they push them, they pull them, and they make sure that they achieve, right? Can the kids achieve higher? We think they can, and we want them to achieve higher. But that's singly the most important thing that impacts it. The other thing, when you look at research on the outside, where schools, and you can find this research, schools that have higher performing kids typically have more expensive houses, right? Why do schools that have higher performing kids have more expensive houses? Because the parents have higher paying jobs, right? There's a direct financial correlation that exists in education. There is an achievement gap that exists in the United States. That is real. Again, we can go back and look through Cherry Hill, and see what we've done, where we have found areas where we've been able to shrink the achievement gap, where we have been able to address that as the kids come through. But I think those are 2 of the biggest areas.
Yeah, I do understand that. But one thing I wanted to also reiterate is like a school like Masterman, they actually start in 5th grade and they go through 12th grade. And so they start the kids, and whatever they're doing, they do an exceptional job. And I understand they're a magnet school, but I really wish that, we could at least have someone look and study and understand what are they doing that helps them to be so successul. And especially since they started the 5th grade and they go up through high school.
Right. There's some of and Dr. Mahan and I can spend some time going through some of the research. One of the other things that goes in is when you have a magnet school that exists, there's a certain level of segregating students that exist with a magnet school. because it requires parents to do something other than just register their kids for school. When you require parents to do something in addition, you've already started to filter kids to go through because parents have to take an additional step. They have to fill out additional paperwork. They have to commit their child, instead of going to the neighborhood school, going to a different school. So there is a piece that exists there, but we will absolutely follow up with Masterman.
Thank you, Mr. Goodwin. Mrs. Schultz?
Hi, I don't have any additional questions that haven't been asked or commented on, but I do want to thank Mrs. Mahan and team for the wonderful presentation and all the information. So thank you for sharing.
Thank you, Mrs. Schultz. And Mrs. Tong?
No, I have no comments. Yeah, I do thank everybody for all the comments and putting together this data. Hopefully we can work with the students that need extra help. That's my other comment that I might add on. Is helping the students that need extra help.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Much like Ms. Schultz, most of my concerns and or questions that I had, I do sit on the C&I committee, so I was able to have them answered before tonight. So I don't have anything additional to ask at this time. So with that said, thank you very much, and we will move into correspondence. Thank you, everybody, for that presentation.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to go around the room again and see if anybody has any correspondence for us this evening. I'll start with Mrs. Neary.
None, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Goodwin.
None for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Matlack.
I do have 2 pieces of correspondence. I attended 2 virtual meetings this month to report on to the board. The first was the county leadership meeting. As vice president of the Camden County School Boards Association, I attended that meeting virtually on May 4th. And then this Saturday, May 9th, I attended the New Jersey School Board's Legislative Committee meeting. I have my notes for the county leadership meeting, and our next meeting, I will share my notes from the Legislative Committee because I don't have them right here with me. I think they're downstairs. So the county leadership meeting talked about the delegate assembly for board representatives will be held June 27th, and it will be virtually. And then most of the meeting was taking questions from school districts, via their county leadership. And I'll just tell you what some of the concerns were. There really were no answers to any of these. And Ray Pinney from New Jersey School Boards basically took notes and said that they would try to get answers for them. So some of the concerns from districts around the state are how are arts programs going to be delivered in this online environment. People had questions about curricular expectations when in-school learning resumes. There was a little bit of a discussion about the state treasurer making the forecast for next year for budgets, for the state budget, which therefore impacts our budget, and that will be on May 22nd, that the state treasurer will make that forecast. There was talk about fall sports and what would that look like. Of course, nobody knows, so there was no information. And there was some discussion about how districts were handling end of year activities like device return, cleaning out classrooms, graduation, things like that. All things that, our district has already addressed some of those things, and other districts are just now starting to think about those things. So hearing from so many different people from around the state and their experiences, I would just like to say a great big thank you to our district for being so on top of everything that is happening and looking ahead and working out the different scenarios so that if it occurs, we are ready. And having been at this meeting and hearing what else is happening, I really appreciate that. So I just wanted to share that. And our next meeting, I'll share my notes from the legislative committee meeting. I apologize.
Thank you, Mrs. Matlack. Mrs. Schultz, any correspondence?
I have none, thank you.
Okay. Mrs. Tong?
Nope, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Friedel?
No, thank you.
Mrs. Arroyo?
I have a comment. I'm not sure it's correspondence per se, but I was driving in to work and I drove by one of the distribution sites for the food. And I just wanted to commend the district on how organized and just seamless it all looked from just driving by. And I'm just really proud of how that's working out. So.
Thank you. I'm sure the district and administration appreciates that. I also had an opportunity to drive by and had similar thoughts. So thank you for sharing that. Mr. Avadia, any correspondence?
Yes, thank you. Camden County Educational Services Commission met last Wednesday, May 6th. Just a couple things I wanted to kind of talk about that were mentioned there. They're putting together a group of superintendents. I didn't have a chance to ask if we were included, but might be an interesting source of alternate ideas. If we're not included, I'm sure it'll produce some kind of report. A couple things they mentioned was trying to gather the questions of the region, concerns of the region, and looking at some hybrid models next year for in-person instruction rolling into virtual, back into in-person, back into virtual. So that I thought was interesting and of note. I talked about esports a couple months ago. They did proceed to respond to the RFP, waiting to hear about esports being kind of a regional convener in terms of the Educational Services Commission. They are looking at being the New Jersey rep for Stop It, and we were highlighted as a district that was an early adopter of that Stop It app. The idea would be to bring it to more districts in Camden County, and then they would be actually the state rep if that went through. So that's potentially in process. They talked about equity digital divide, and they mentioned a statistic that about 90,000 of the 1.3 million New Jersey public school students do not have reliable either internet or device. They're looking to do something where they can, at an affordable price, roll both into a package and offer that as a provider to districts and to students who need it. So that sounded kind of cool. Noted that there have been some generous corporations that have kind of stepped in the gap, but at some point they're going to want to get paid, and so trying to systematize this for the future. I thought that was pretty neat. One of the interesting things of note that we voted on unanimously was they will not be accepting facility rental requests through the end of this year and through the end of next year. The feeling of the superintendent of the Educational Service Commission is that in return to work, the biggest concern is health, and introducing visitors into their buildings creates additional risk. Looking at that model of rolling in and out of physical instruction, they've taken that off the table. So just the time bound of that made it sort of interesting. And that's what I have to report.
Thank you, Mr. Avadia. Okay, now we're going to move into our board committee reports, and I'm going to turn it back over to Mrs. Matlack to cover curriculum and instruction.
Thank you very much. Well, most of our meeting was the science assessment results, which we all just received and had time to discuss. The other items that we had were, we talked about the family-friendly centers, and Mr. Klitz and Mrs. Rockhill provided us with an overview of the family-friendly center grant, and they're seeking approval to renew the application and accept the funds from the Department of Children and Families. And we also talked about the district goals and an update, and we reviewed the goals and discussed the progress towards them. If any other committee members have anything to add, I'd be happy to let them do so.
Okay, if not, I will see if anybody has any questions, and I'll start with Mrs. Schultz.
So she's waiting.
Oh, it looks like she got kicked out. So I'll jump over to Mrs. Tong. Any questions on CNI?
Nope.
Okay. Mrs. Schultz, are you there?
I am. I'm back.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Any questions on CNI?
None, thank you.
Okay. Ms. Friedel?
No, I'm on the committee. Thank you.
Okay. Mrs. Arroyo?
No, thank you.
Okay. Mr. Ovadia?
No questions for me. Thank you.
Okay. Mrs. Neary?
No questions, thank you.
Okay. And Mr. Goodwin?
No questions for me. Thank you.
Thank you. And I don't have any follow-up questions either. So I will next turn it over to Mrs. Schultz to go over our BNF committee report.
Thank you, Mrs. Seidel. So the BNF committee, along with Mrs. Weathington and Miss Adrian, we met on May 5th at 6 p.m. We did meet in closed session, and at our meeting, we conducted our interviews for the district's solicitors. So 4 firms were interviewed during this meeting, and at this time, the district has decided to reappoint Shank, Price, Smith, and King. And with that, our next meeting will be June 2nd. So with that, if there are any questions.
Great, thank you, Mrs. Schultz. I'll go around the room and I will start with Mrs. Tong.
No questions for me.
Okay, Ms. Friedel.
So could we get a little bit more detail as to the strength of their presentation versus the other 3?
Mrs. Schultz, are you prepared to share that information, or anyone else on the committee?
Absolutely. Yes, so we had, let me just pull it up. So we had 4 different solicitors that we did interviews for, and I just want to grab my notes, Mrs. Frieda. And when we met, and I'll go ahead and start and then go around if any of the other committee members want to add comments or feedback, please feel free. But when we went through and we met and we discussed at this time, we looked at the other firms that we had interviewed and we met with, and the strengths of Schrank, Price, Smith, and King, what we felt were they were bringing to the table, with the fact that we had 2 members, our partners with Mr. Green and Robin coming to the table. They both had worked with the district. There was some partnerships there, and when we would be moving into virtual learning coming up possibly, and having to navigate through that, those kind of some of those difficult situations that we might be going through, that we just really liked the presentation by the firm. We also liked the fact that the special education, that background that Robin had, that would be coming with the decision to move with that, versus some of the other solicitors that we had interviewed. And specifically, some of the other, 2 of the other candidates that we had, I guess, interviewed, that was one of the bigger things that we had discussed as a committee was that we would have only one point of contact, and in a district our size of our special education, we just felt like we wanted somebody who could kind of represent that with, I guess, kind of more of a focus versus two of the firms who we would have only one representative, and they would have, they would be serving our entire district, and versus kind of the dedication that we would get with, I guess, our current firm that we have. And then we looked at, we also looked at just kind of experience. We looked at just, again, seeing what was going to be some of the challenges and I guess some of the things that would be coming, I guess, up in the next coming years. Those are some of the questions that the committee had asked, is just what do you foresee as challenges coming ahead? And we asked how they would help us with some of those challenges. So I think those were some of kind of the questions we had asked. And then a lot of it had to do with the support we would be given from each one of the firms and what that looked like and who would be our main point of contact, and just kind of various different things in that regard. So I'll kind of pause, see if anybody has specific questions or if anybody has anything else that they'd like to add.
Thank you, Mrs. Schultz. What I'll do is I'll next go to the additional committee members. So Mrs. Neary.
Yeah, thank you. I think Ruth kind of highly summarized. I would say when we met with each of the firms, all the firms that submitted proposals presented, and then some of the challenges that we faced, you know, with some of the firms is they didn't have representation with them for us to even speak with and understand how they would service the district. And then having that dedicated resource at our meetings to provide that guidance wasn't available from some of the other firms. One of the firms was newer and really couldn't speak to the background in dealing with a district our size and in this area. So I would say those were some of the challenges that we had going through that process.
Great, thank you. Mr. Avadia?
Yeah, I would just, not much to add. I would say, you know, thanks to Mrs. Sugars for 4 good proposals that came through, all of whom should have been interviewed. Thank you to Ms. Schultz for taking us through the interview process. For me, the reality was, and I believe everyone on the committee agreed, that the best presentation is the firm we selected. After that, there could be concerns over, you know, maybe they present well, but they're terrible to work with. Turned out not to be the case. Could be concerns of, look, they're great, but they cost double what's reasonable. Also not the case. And so we chose the best firm. And there were some concerns on the other end with the other 3 proposals in terms of the service, the experience, their overall preparedness to service us, in addition to, you know, what it would take in terms of transition cost and time and frankly, ability. So for me, at the end of it, there was really one firm, and that's the one we put forward.
Great, thank you, Mr. Avadia. Mr. Goodwin?
So can I just say, I just wanted to say thank you, Ruth, Ms. Schultz, for giving such a great overview to those of us who aren't on the committee. And thank you to the rest of the committee for your thoughts.
Thank you, Mrs. Friedel. And I apologize, Mrs. Matlack, you are also on the committee. So did you have anything to add there?
Oh, thank you. I think Mrs. Schultz did a great job summarizing it, and Laurie and Ben, you know, I echo their sentiments. You know, we absolutely, you know, did right by interviewing the firms that we did. But in the end, I believe that we made the correct decision for our district in choosing the firm that we did. So, you know, thank you for the process. Thank you, Mrs. Schultz, for being there and leading us during that process, and Mrs. Sugars for, you know, getting us, you know, the great choices that we had, and ultimately I believe we picked the best one, the best match for our district. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Matlack. Now, Mr. Goodwin, I will ask you if you have any questions.
I do not. It was I do appreciate all of the great summarization of why the choice was made, and I just appreciate the work done there. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mrs. Arroyo.
No, thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I just want to offer my thanks as well. It sounds like the committee did a great job of representing the board and the district's interests in the interview process. So thank you for that. Okay, next I will turn it over to Mrs. Tong for Human Resources. Mrs. Tong, do you have anything you can share from your meeting?
Yes, I have just gone over some policies revised for the domestic violence. And then we have a new first reading for postnatal certified staff and support staff. The third thing we discussed is CHEA negotiation. And then we have the next meeting going to be the HR committee meeting. It's going to be on June 1st, 2020. That's all I can share.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Ms. Friedel, any questions?
I do have a question, and I guess it's more of a process question, but I'm just curious why policies were in HR for discussion as opposed to in policy and legislation.
Yes, please.
Ms. Friedel, it's Joe. So depending upon what the policies are, if they are specifically related to an individual committee, we will introduce them in that committee and do the first reading in that committee. So specifically, Ms. Adrian, as the Director of Human Resources, the Human Resources Committee, these three policies tied in directly with and have an impact on staff, as opposed to some of the larger umbrella things that spread out across.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for clarifying, Dr. Malak.
Absolutely.
Mrs. Arroyo?
No, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Avadia?
No questions, thanks.
Mrs. Neary?
No questions. That was my question.
Okay, Mr. Goodwin?
No questions for me. Thank you.
Mrs. Matlack?
No questions for me, thank you.
Okay, and Mrs. Schultz?
No questions, thank you.
Okay, next I will turn it over to Mrs. Neary for policy and legislation.
Great, thank you. So we met virtually on May 4th. We had a first reading on several policies. Policy 5330, the administration of medicine, policy 8210, the school year, and 8220, the school day, and then 8462, reporting potentially missing or abused children. And then we also had a legislative update, and that was regarding the schools being closed the remainder of the year. That was the most recent update that we had. And then the continuity of learning plan, which was the same information that was sent out to the families in the newsletter. And that would be going into the third phase of new instruction with assignments to carry us through to the end of the school year. And then, you know, there were some questions around grading and any needing to change any policy, and no policy needed to be changed, but that there be adjustments for final grades, and that flexible deadlines remain in place, and that it would be reviewed and finalized last week. And that mostly at the middle school, because it doesn't match marking periods 1 through 3, marking period 4 is a little bit different in the approach. And then we also discussed items such as, you know, attendance and guidance from the state is to count as present. We also discussed the policy for 5530, went into some detail on that, and it's a mandatory policy. The statute was from December 2019. However, it took until now to get the policy. And there's reference about the administration of medication and receiving some changes in the language regarding the parents retrieving that medication and what the schools would do with the medication. Policy 8210 for the school year, the language changes and it allowed actually greater flexibility. For example, half day of 4 hours, it no longer says of actual instruction, it says, for 4 hours. And then, some of the committee members had questions around, the placement of in-service day and what we could do with that. For policy 8220 around the school day, also provided for greater flexibility for districts with removing the start and stop times. And then for the policy regarding reporting potentially missing and abused children, language was added around displaying DCF's information. And then committee member Ms. Friedel asked if there's any posters that they already have that we could then place throughout our schools, already a standard poster in place if we could get that. So that was high level, the information that we covered. And then again, I would ask the committee members if I missed anything or if there was any discussion that I didn't cover.
Thank you, Mrs. Neary. Mrs. Arroyo, anything as a committee member to add?
No. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Friedel?
No, Lori did a great job covering it.
And Mrs. Tong? Mrs. Tong, anything to add?
I said no, I don't have anything to add. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Avadia, any additional questions?
No, no questions. Thank you.
Okay, Mrs. Schultz?
No questions, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Goodwin?
No questions. Thank you.
Okay, and Mrs. Matlack?
No questions, thank you.
Okay, great. That brings it to, yep, sorry, you just told me that. That quickly, it went out of my head.
Sorry, Ms. Seidel. I just want to add for everybody, when we have the action meeting on May the 26th, 2 weeks from tonight, on that agenda under P&L, we will ask the board to formally adopt the continuity of learning plan / the continuity of learning emergency preparedness. We've received an update from the Department of Ed last Tuesday, I guess, and asked us to do additional review of the continuity of learning plan, some additional items to include in there. It was not going to be ready for tonight with the changes. I did not want to just push it through, so we will include that on the May 26th board meeting. There will be updates as we post it on the website. As we have done, we will share that with the board and we'll share that with the community if and when any changes are made.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so now I will give an update on our strategic planning meeting, which was held Monday, May 4th at 7 p.m. And we are coming to the end of our building reviews. At this last meeting, we covered High School West, which was originally built in 1956 and has approximately 1,300 students, 1317 to be exact. It has additions in 64, 87, 94, and 01, so lots of additions in that building. As we've done with the other building reviews, we talked about some things that have been completed over the last 2 years. Such as roof leak repairs, baseball, backstops and fencing, HVAC upgrades, interior and exterior doors, and cameras. And then items that are currently in progress or recently completed, such as the security suite, vestibule, Jones Gym. I have Jones Gym room, but that doesn't sound right. The roof. Not the room. The Jones Gym roof. Auditorium wall repair that we had previously discussed, and updates to the old auditorium. And then future things that are on the agenda that need to get done at some point in the near future. As with all of our buildings, curbs, sidewalks, paving, interior doors and locks, science lab renovations, accessibility, curtain wall replacements, locker room updates, generators, and kitchen renovations and media center upgrades, all very important things that we need to get done. So, from that conversation, we talked in more detail about some things like the kitchen updates. Is there some partnership we can form to get some of those things done? We have refrigerator trucks that we use as a district that need some help. So where can we partner to get some of the things that we need done in our high schools, but particularly at West for the kitchen? We talked a little bit about lockers and discussions about, what do we really need lockers? Do the students actually use them? We used a lot of our own personal experiences from the board perspective, because it does seem that many children do not use the lockers. So what does that look like? What are we required to provide? What do we need to make available? Is that something we should spend money on? And, so thinking about lockers and then what they're used for as we're talking about these future projects will be something I'm sure we'll talk about in the future. It then sort of, led us into the conversation because we talked about some of these items, and then the number of students at West versus the number of students at East. So that brings us logically to the conversations that we typically have in strategic planning and are going to be having in strategic planning for the foreseeable future. How do we need to take a look at potentially evening out the number of students in each of these buildings? Right now we have open enrollment. Is that something that we wanted to have a discussion about? And what would that discussion look like? I'll let Mr. Avadia, when I go around, talk about his specific items that he brought up on possibly a 9th, 10th center and an 11th, 12th center. But all of these things, all of these discussion points are things that we should and need to be having in strategic planning. And we just sort of touched the surface of them, and we'll be discussing them in much more detail over the next several months and years as we continue to take our strategic goals and turn that into our long range plan. We also got an update on the committees, the various committees that are in the process of the strategic planning cycle. Their committees are all still meeting virtually. They're meeting with Judy Wilson as needed. And the alternative funding and safety and security committees, both had their final meetings and tweaked their recommendations. And both of those committees are set to present their recommendations to the board at our May 26th meeting. So we're excited to see the work of the committees. I'm on the Safety and Security Committee. I'm excited for my colleagues to hear the recommendations from that committee. It was really a great experience. So I think we will be very excited with what these committees will be providing to us. And that, we're definitely continuing on this calendar that we've laid out for ourselves, and we're making a lot of progress moving forward with our strategic planning initiatives. So that's exciting. We also touched a bit on a new software program, and Dr. Malash may want to elaborate on a little called Thought Exchange. This is a software that the district has purchased that will really be a wonderful tool for us to use, not only in strategic planning, but really for every committee and for the district as a whole. It sort of takes and I'm just, again, we'll get more information on this, but it takes the best of what is available from Facebook and the best of what is available from surveys and sort of mashes it together into a product. So again, that's very basic. I'll let Dr. Malash elaborate on it if he would like, but we're excited about using that program to help us gather data, gather feedback, and share messages and communicate with our community. So I was excited about that. So that was pretty much the gist of our meeting. I'm going to ask Mr. Goodwin if he had anything to add as a committee member.
No, I think you did a great job covering everything. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Ovadia?
Yes, this is a great report. You'd mentioned something for me to mention, so let me just jump in quickly to say, when we looked at the 3 levels and based on the discussion, now let's take high school. I think we spent a good amount of time on that. You know, the idea was, look, if we've got 2 high schools that roughly, from a geographic perspective, if that's the way it was done, would be about equal in enrollment. Instead, there's a huge disparity leaning toward high school east versus high school west with open enrollment. And then the question was, well, look, we can't go back to a geographic because this is based on a court case that was settled. I mean, this we felt fairly strong about. But do we use an opportunity, now that we've pushed off the timeline of the bond a bit, to get some public input on what would people think, what is the opinion, what's going on out there in terms of having a 9-10 school and an 11-12 school? It creates, for sure, some logistical problems and issues. But as we saw in our earlier presentation tonight, there is a piece of evening up equity. And so, you know, for me, it wasn't a recommendation, but this is where we started to talk about really getting some input in real time in a platform that's being studied and I think ready to be implemented in the short term by the district. And I'm excited about that because I think, you know, for a lot of things, it's good to get a sense of, you know, where is the public leaning? You know, when we're not screaming necessarily back and forth, but where we're really looking for some deliberative input. And I think a similar case can be made about, you know, Rosa. That's not one where we have a court case. That's one where we have, you know, one school that's applied for, some kids get in, the other 2 being geographically bound. How do people feel about it? You know, is that working for people? If it is, great. If not, do we look at more of a geographic between 3? But I think we have a little bit of time. I think we have a platform coming on board. I'm excited to hear about some of what, you know, community input is in a real way, where people can really interact, and it, you know, it doesn't become a campaign thing so much as an input mechanism. So that was a good discussion, and I look forward to more of that.
Yep, I would agree. It was definitely a good discussion, and you're absolutely right. There's going to be a lot of that going forward in the future, starting in strategic planning and then obviously bleeding over into all of the committees, since, you know, much of the work of strategic planning does that. So lots more to come on that. Mrs. Matlack, anything additional to add as a committee member?
No, thank you.
Okay. And with that, I will see if Lori has any questions. Mrs. Neary.
Just, this is great to hear and great conversation, and I'm hoping we're going to continue it as a full board, especially around what do the high schools look like, what do the middle schools look like. I know it's emotionally charged conversation out in the community, but I'm wondering, one, how much of it is happening organically anyway, and at what point is it no longer sustainable? And you have to look at it, especially at the high school level. So I'm hoping we're going to continue that as a full board in conversation. I don't know if it's right now in this moment, if we look to it in another section of the agenda, but I think that's great, and I really want to continue that conversation.
Yep, thank you, Ms. Neary. And we did, if you remember, one of the items that when we were downloading from the ad hoc committee that we as a board committed to was that, you know, many of these conversations do need to happen as a full board and not just in committee. And I think when we get to the point where administration is perhaps ready to make some recommendations to the board, that would be the right place to start having those in the full board, and both at the committee level and the full board level. So we will definitely be having a lot of those discussions as a full board.
Great, thank you.
Sure. Mrs. Schultz, any questions?
I don't have any questions. I would kind of echo what Ms. Neary said about just, having to have, taking the first stab at having some of these conversations and looking forward to future conversations and just I look forward to being a part of that, having just seen the results of the demographic study and then hearing what you're saying about, do we need lockers and what are the 9th and 10th and 11th and 12th. I think those are great conversations to just start having. So I appreciate that, that conversation took place, and I just look forward to being part of the discussion.
Thank you. Mrs. Tong?
Nope, no questions.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Friedel?
Well, I concur with the other statements about having conversations about the schools and the different options, the lockers, and how today's students use the schools versus how their parents did. I do have a question though. When you are doing the updates on the schools, do you look at the accessibility work that has been done?
Yes, we have been, and we look at it. So as we review each school, we review it in 3 phases. The look back of what's been done over the past 2 years, things that are currently in place, and then items that are on the agenda for the future. Yes, we are looking at accessibility as one piece of that.
Yes. So I think that was West your last school?
Nope, we have East next strategic planning meeting in June.
Okay, if possible, could we get that added to the report for East? I mean, I know you've already done the rest, but it would be nice to know what work has been done and what's planned, if that's known and possible.
Sure. So I think the presentations that Ms. Sugar's been giving, they've been uploaded. They're in our folders. I did not, and I know you've been sending them along with the Friday packet, but I did not see the West one this week.
Yeah, I'll pass them along.
Okay, they're usually very big.
Yeah.
But yes, we can certainly do maybe a recap of all of the schools for some of the highlights. But Ms. Friedel, they are in, except for West, which we'll get up there, they are all in the folder. They should be in the, would they be in the CNI folder? In the presentation folder, or just in the board folder? Okay, well, I'll find out exactly where they are for you and give you the information.
Much appreciated, thank you.
No problem. And then Mrs. Arroyo.
No questions, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we are now going to move into our first public comment session. And as we've done for the past couple of meetings, community members had an opportunity to submit their questions on anything on the agenda in advance to Mrs. Sugars, and I'll just give her email address again in case anybody has a last minute question they want to send over for items on the agenda. lshugars@chclc.org, and I'll turn it over to Mrs. Sugars to read any comments she's already received.
I don't have any that relate to the agenda.
Okay.
I do have some for the last.
Okay, great. Okay, so we'll come back to you for that. Next, we're going to move into our special action agenda, and we do not have any items for C&I tonight, but I will turn it over to Mrs. Nope, I'm going to move it and then. Okay, so I am going to move our B&F agenda. So the superintendent recommends and I move the following. Number 1, approval of bill lists. Item number 2, New Jersey Department of Education project application and schematic plan submission for Beck Middle School project. And Mrs. Schultz, do I have a second?
I second.
Great, thank you. And I will go around and see if anybody has any questions. And I will start with Mrs. Neary.
No questions, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Goodwin.
No questions, thank you.
Mrs. Matlack.
No questions, thank you.
Okay, Mrs. Tong.
No questions, thank you.
Okay, Ms. Friedel.
No questions, thank you.
Mrs. Arroyo.
No, thank you.
Okay, and Mr. Avadia.
No questions, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Mrs. Sugars, I'll turn it over to you for the vote.
All right, I'm going to open up the online voting. So board members, you should be able to cast your votes. Okay, so we have a unanimous vote.
Okay, thank you.
And then I will check for any abstentions, particularly on the bill list. Ms. Arroyo,
No.
Ms. Friedel,
None for me, thank you.
Mr. Goodwin,
None for me.
Mrs. Matlack,
None for me, thank you.
Mrs. Neary,
None, thank you.
Mr. Vadia,
None, thanks.
Mrs. Schultz,
None, thank you.
Mrs. Tong,
None for me, thank you.
Mrs. Seidel.
None, thank you. Okay, next we will move into our HR agenda. The superintendent recommends and I move the following. Number 1, termination of employment certificated. Number 2, termination of employment non-certificated. Number 3, appointments certificated. Number 4, appointments non-certificated. Number 5, contract renewals certificated, offer of employment. Number 6, contract renewals certificated. Number 7, contract renewals non-certificated. Number 8, other compensation certificated. Mrs. Tong, can I have a second?
Second for me.
Thank you. Ms. Friedel, any questions?
No questions, thank you.
Mrs. Arroyo?
No, thank you.
Mr. Avadia?
None, thanks.
Mrs. Neary?
None, thank you.
Mr. Goodwin?
None, thank you.
Mrs. Matlack?
No questions, thank you.
And Mrs. Schultz?
No questions, thank you.
Okay. Mrs. Sugars?
I'm going to open up the online voting for board members. Okay, you should be able to cast your votes now. All right, it appears we have a unanimous vote. I will check for any abstentions or exceptions. Mrs. Arroyo,
None, thank you.
Ms. Friedel,
No abstentions, thank you.
Mr. Goodwin,
No abstentions, thank you.
Mrs. Matlack,
None, thank you.
Mrs. Neary,
None, thank you.
Mr. Avadia,
None, thank you.
Mrs. Schultz,
None, thank you.
Mrs. Tong,
No, thank you.
Mrs. Seidel.
None, thank you. Okay, next I will move the P&L agenda. The superintendent recommends and I move the following. Number 1, approval of harassment, intimidation, bullying, investigation decisions. Mrs. Neary, do I have a second?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Goodwin, any questions?
No,
Mrs.
thank
Matlack?
you.
No questions, thank you.
Mrs. Schultz?
No questions, thank you.
Mrs. Tong?
I'm not sure. Can you let me know the case? Or can you refresh me what this case 2 number is? There's nothing I can read upon it.
Not in the public meeting.
No, I'm sorry, Mrs. Tong, we can't have that discussion in public.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Ms. Friedel?
No questions, thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Arroyo?
No questions, thank you.
And Mr. Avadia?
None, thank you.
Okay. Thank you. We don't have any items for strategic planning tonight.
You have to vote.
Oh,
You have to vote on it.
yeah, I'm sorry.
That's all right.
I'm sorry. It's been a very long
Don't apologize.
day. Okay, we're gonna vote on the P&L agenda.
All right, so I'm opening the online voting for board members. Since we only have one item, I will not check because we have a unanimous vote with one abstention, Mrs. Tom.
Okay. Okay, thank you. So now I will say we do not have any items for strategic planning, but we're going to move into our organization agenda. And Dr. Malash, I'll turn it over to you to maybe give a little summary of the purpose behind all of these items that I'm about to read.
Absolutely. So there are 2 times during the year that most boards of education reorganize. And this changed because we operate on a fiscal year that goes July 1st through June the 30th. Traditionally, the board vote and the vote on the budget and to elect board members had been in April. So after the board vote was done, after all that was taken care of, the reorganization would take place in May, and you would seat the new board members, talk about budget, and all that kind of stuff. A number of years ago, a determination was made that as long as school districts stayed within 2% of raising the budget, that the budget did not need to be voted on. And the board vote for board members was switched to November. So now we seat new board members in January after the November election. But we still have a number of things that have to be reappointed for July 1st every year. So that's why we still do a reorganization of the board and reappoint people in May in order for it to be taken care of. So it's all set and ready to go for July 1st because of the fiscal year.
Thank you. So with that, the superintendent recommends, and
this is just discussion.
This is just
a work
discussion.
session.
We don't have to.
Yeah.
We will
Got
be,
it.
this is for the next board.
For
meeting.
next
We'll vote on
board
it,
meeting.
yeah, on
Okay.
26th.
So there's a lot of items.
There's a lot of items that, right, when you look in here, and a lot of these are specific responsibilities that many of our administrators have. You'll see Mrs. Sugar's name appears a lot. That's directly related to her role as the board secretary and the business administrator. You'll see that Mrs. Wethington's name appears a number of times. Mrs. Minjan's name appears a number of times as People's Services Office for responsibilities related to being the affirmative action officer in Title IX, 504, substance awareness coordinator, public agency compliance. There's a homeless liaison, responsibilities that Mr. McCarty, who's our director of facilities, has, responsibilities that Mr. Goldthorpe, who supervises science for the district, that he has, some of the financials that we use, tax shelter, the Omni Group. This has our architect of record. As you recall, earlier this year, we did an RFP, we interviewed for architects, and we changed architectural firms. So we appointed kind of a mirror through that interview through the end of June. The new architect is listed in here. The auditor, which is also a new company, but similar auditors involved, is listed. Bond counsel, insurance broker of record, the solicitor. We just had a long discussion during the B and F section earlier about the interviews that we did with the solicitor that has that appointment as well. Then one of on here, I'm going to ask Mr. Sugars to explain it. It comes through and it says the resolution awarding an extraordinary unspecifiable services contract for continuing disclosure agent services and independent registered municipal advisor. Now I had Mrs. Sugars wrote us a memo and put that in the agenda for the board this past weekend. But if you can just explain, Mrs. Sugars, again, so as people are looking at that, what that actually means.
So we award that, that's a term, extraordinary unspecifiable services contract is not something that we do very often. There are very few things that fall into that category. It's not really a professional appointment. So you very rarely see that, but that's how we award this contract. And what this firm does for us, it's Phoenix Advisors, is specifically what they do is they make sure that we are meeting all of our requirements with the SEC. We have a lot of reporting requirements that we need to do. We have to make sure that all of our current financial documents is posted to a website, which is known as EMMA. And that is so that when it is time for us to sell bonds or do any type of financing, financial organizations can look at that website and look at our audits, those kinds of things that are posted on that website. So they are our compliance officer, making sure that we are getting all those things posted when we need to. Also, we will work very closely with them when we get closer to referendum and deciding what does a 20-year payback schedule look like on bonds? What does a 15-year schedule payback look like? How can we structure the bonds so that we minimize the tax impact in the first couple of years? So as we discuss those types of scenarios, that is the firm that will run all of the financial projections for us moving forward. Also, in addition, as we find ourselves in these kind of uncharted territories, should we need to do some type of temporary financing, such as a tax anticipation note, they would be the firm that would help us through that process.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so I will go around the room.
Well, let me just go through, just because there's a whole bunch of things, just to go down a little bit. There's also the approval of reaffirmation of policies, actions, rules, and regulations. We do this every year as well. There's a resolution in here about our involvement with Camden County Educational Services Commission. Mr. Ovadia, when he did his correspondence, he reported out, Mr. Ovadia sits on the Camden County Educational Services Commission board. He represents our school district on that board. You can see in that section of the agenda all the different things that the Ed Services Commission, that we contract with them to do. Most of it has to deal with it's the pass-through that we do and deals with non-public schools and the services that are provided. And then bank accounts, the people that sign and can sign for accounts. You can see the full list of accounts that we have. In there we have, there's a dollar amount for petty cash for every school. Always when you look at this, you can see that Thomas Paine Elementary School and High School West have 2 different petty cash accounts. And that's because of specialized programs that we have for children who attend those 2 schools that are in there. There's a tax receipt schedule. The tax receipt schedule is listed in there. And that's when we expect the monies that we expect to receive from the township on those specific dates. And then that takes us through that's all of the reorganization stuff.
Okay. So now I will go around the room and see if anybody has any specific questions. So I will start with Mr. Ovadia.
No, I just wanted to ask, it's sort of related to the last one, but I understand that the BA for the township was meeting with us, and these discussions have been good in terms of delayed payment and stuff for taxes.
Yes. Let me just make a brief comment, Mr. Ovadia, then I'll ask Mrs. Sugars to go a little bit more into the detail. So the state of New Jersey, there are 2 things that have happened as a result of the pandemic that directly may have an impact on us financially. One is that the state extended their fiscal year through September the 30th. So we won't know, we've been told how much money that we should build our budget with based on the state aid figures that we received in February. We built that budget, the board adopted the budget, the county has approved the budget both preliminarily and the final approval after the board adopted the budget in April. So that's what we're moving forward with. We won't know what the actual dollars that we will receive from the state look like until they release their budget at the end of the summer and into September. So there's a question about what the impact may be. One of the other things is about tax receipts. The state also allowed for taxes, local taxes to be, local municipalities to delay the tax collection until June 1st for taxes that were due May 1st. So we have worked with the township, because if they're not collecting all the tax dollars from the businesses and residents in Cherry Hill, that could have an impact on how much they're able to pay us. And again, we all know, because of the way funding works in New Jersey, the local municipal tax that we receive from Cherry Hill is the largest part of our budget every single year. So Mrs. Sugars and I have spent time talking with the business administrator for the township, with the mayor, Mrs. Ridgway, who's the assistant business administrator for us, as well as folks over there, about what the impact is and what our plan is. So let Mrs. Sugars talk a little bit as well.
Yeah, so I think the key here is going to be communication. We have set up a standing bi-weekly meeting so that we can make sure that we're staying in communication. You know, we've done a lot of projections on what our cash flow looks like. June is a big month for us in terms of payroll because we're sort of closing out our fiscal year. So June tends to be a very big payroll for us. And then it drops off, obviously, in July because we are then only paying our 12-month people. We're not paying all the 10-month people. So, you know, we've had some of those conversations. I know that the township has some large debt payments that they have to make in July. So they obviously have their own cash flow needs that they need to consider. So they have extended their deadline in terms of when the taxes are due to June 1st. So right now it's difficult to kind of judge what it's going to look like. We'll know more after that deadline. And I think we just, you know, the key is going to be staying in close communication with each other, making sure that each of us is aware of what's going on, what the needs are. And then, you know, if at some point a tax anticipation note is needed, I know that they're tentatively thinking about July as a possibility because they have those large debt payments. You know, we'll talk about what our cash flow needs are, what their cash flow needs are. And we'll work together. I mean, it is what it is. We, you know, we have to work together on this. And we've made a commitment to do that. And we will check in every 2 weeks and just touch base and make sure that we're all still on the same page.
Yes, the open and cooperative relationship between the district and the township is incredibly important. You know, and it benefits us that we've invested time and energy and resources in that, you know, over the last 6 or 7 years. Mrs. Ridgway and Mrs. Sugars have absolutely taken a lead in this, you know, and their knowledge to the level of detail and the intricacies of our budget, what happens, has been incredibly important, you know, as we're planning, because we're planning through what's the summer look like and then what does the academic year look like as well, dependent upon what monies will come through.
Okay, thank you very much for your work on that, and I appreciate that.
Okay, Mrs. Arroyo.
No questions, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Friedel.
No questions, thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Tong.
No questions, thank you.
Okay, Mrs. Schultz.
No questions, thank you.
Mrs. Matlack.
No questions, thank you.
Mr. Goodwin.
No question. Thank you.
Okay, and Mrs. Neary.
Yeah, just one quick question around the continuity of learning plan. We'll vote on that at the next session, and then obviously that'll go to the county and state. Does that allow us, as we look at it and as we adjust for things that we learn and what the future may look like, does that allow us to make changes to that plan and resubmit or make any adjustments at all as more of a living document, or is that something that once it's approved, it's concrete and that's what we work with until the next iteration?
Yeah, good question, Mrs. Neary. Thank you for asking. So the continuity of learning plan is a living document. We have updated it a few times since we originally published it for March 16th when we were first closed. You know, initially the department didn't want it adopted. We had asked, and they made the determination they do want it to be adopted by the board now. It will remain a living document. In fact, there'll be language in the introduction of the continuity of learning plan that it is alive and based on the needs and what we are doing, that it will continue to evolve and to change. But we'll always include the date when it was revised for what's most recently updated on the website. And again, Dr. Mahan, Dr. Smith, Mrs. Wethington, Miss Adrian, Mr. Bart, Mrs. Sugars, all play an intricate role in what goes on as they work with the building principals. We have staff that's involved. You know, you as a board, you know that we've talked about the development of a return to work committee and a return to school committee that will involve staff from across the district. We'll have some PTA input as well as input from the CPAG, the Special Ed Parent Advisory Group. So we start to talk about what does it look like for the fall. But yes, it'll continue to be a living document.
Great, thank you. Does for that, I guess, return to school or return to work, will the board be advised after, or will a board member be part of that process, or how will that work?
So as we initially start, it's just going to be an advisement piece that goes through, and then we'll have additional discussion about what it looks like for a board member to sit on it. We will have additional discussion, but it kind of gets a little mixed in there about the board's role in terms of approval or implementation of things that come out with the recommendations for it. But right now it'll be as an advisement.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Okay. So if there's no further questions, these items will be on the agenda at the meeting at the end of the month. And that means we will move in.
Can I just point one other thing out? I'm sorry,
sure.
Mrs. Seidel. In the work session, just for folks to take a look at, down under the in B&F, there are a couple of things I just want to draw everybody's attention to make sure they take some time to look at. One is it's 25.5. The resolution for participation in Edge Market Cooperative Pricing System. And the other one is 25.6, which is the resolution authorizing the use of cooperative pricing agreements. There's no cost to the district to participate in these consortia, but it does save us a considerable amount of money in order to take advantage of the pricing that's included. You know, they both offer a lot of opportunity in terms of what goes on. But just something for the board members and community folks just take a look at and see where we are, what it looks like.
Yeah, that's a great point because go ahead, Ms. Sugars.
I was just going to add that due to our size, a lot of times we have to worry about butting up against quote and bid thresholds that smaller districts never have to think about. But because we are so big, you know, we can literally spend $40,000 without blinking an eye on a certain item.
Okay.
So we try to take advantage of as many consortiums as we can just to make that process easier for us.
Great. And I was going to say that, you know, in the original ad hoc committee meeting, there were questions from the community about, you know, making sure that the district is taking full advantage of consortiums and other opportunities. And it's great to see that we were already ahead of the curve on many of these, as the administration pointed out during that ad hoc committee. So thank you for pointing that out.
Absolutely.
Okay.
That's all I'm going to say.
Okay. So now, that's okay. So now we'll move into our second public comment, and this comment can be on any topic. And again, people have sent their comments into Mr. Sugars, but you still have a few minutes to do so. Again, lshugars@chclc.org if you have a last minute comment. Mrs. Sugars.
Okay. So our first comment comes from Sagar Desai, who lives at 26 Exton Circle and is a former is an alum of Cherry Hill East. Late last year, I heard of an extremely troubling story regarding CHE banning seniors from partaking in milestone activities due to outstanding meal balances. I believe as little as $75 was quoted. While I am fortunate enough to consider $75 a minor amount, not everybody is. As I served as a student rep to the Board of Education, this made me extremely confused, and I am still struggling to understand how this issue was resolved and how the board is handling it to ensure this does not happen again. You may be wondering why I'm bringing up this story now. As school districts throughout the nation are closed, children who do not have access to internet, those who rely on school for meals and more than just a place to be from 9 to 3 are in the spotlight. Companies across the nation are attempting to aid with internet access for those who may not be able to attend their online lectures. Others are providing meals and wellness checks. My question, in addition to the above, is if Cherry Hill schools cannot professionally handle something as minor as an outstanding meal balance, which is offered to be cleared by the public, as I understand, how can the public have confidence that it can properly handle this immense task during COVID-19? Okay. That's the first comment. The second comment comes from Rick Short at 1002 Shelton Parkway. The Cherry Hill School District and Cherry Hill School Board. I have good news and bad news tonight. First, the bad news. I believe a lot of Cherry Hill taxpayers would like to know upcoming ADA construction project locations with estimated cost plus summer construction project locations with estimated cost. These simple steps often asked will show transparency in Cherry Hill school government and put a lot of Cherry Hill taxpayer questions to rest. Second, the good news, I want to commend the district for its graduation planning this year during this difficult COVID pandemic. You're planning for seniors graduation, middle school graduation, clap outs, and you're planning for students picking up belongings all seems to be well thought out with backup options and fair for students and school parents. Thank you. Okay, and our final comment tonight is from Alana Yaris, 329 Cherry Hill Boulevard. What is the policy on scheduling school events and PTA meetings on the same night and conflicting time as School Board of Education meetings? There have been several BOE meetings scheduled this year, and the schools my kids attend either have a program or PTA meeting, or Zone PTA has a meeting such as tonight. Can there be a master calendar on certain days that are blacked out where schools and PTAs cannot schedule meetings on those days? I, as a parent, cannot do everything, and I am sure others feel the same way. I think having a master calendar of specific no days may be helpful for everyone in the district to stop creating conflicts and making a person decide between event A or event B, or sometimes even event C. Thank you for working so hard during this interesting time to accommodate everyone's needs and providing lunches for all children in Cherry Hill. The learning my children are doing at home really speaks volumes to the educators in our school district, and I appreciate everything they are doing to get my children ready for the next grades. And that's our public comment.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Mosh, do you have any comments on any of those public comments?
I do. So lunch we talked a lot about. The change in the policies and all that kind of stuff that took place last fall. No children were negatively impacted or prohibited from being involved in any activities and or events based on the policy. I will continue to say that we feed all children, including even now, children that show up for lunch. We continue to feed at school, which is what we did in the past. We expanded it this fall by any meal the child requested is what they've been provided. Again, we give a lot of credit to the board, and their ability to see the vision of what needed to change. The work that we did in Cherry Hill impacted and changed state statute and practice that's going on. As we've been closed, we are, Sugar's in our third week of providing meals to all, based on the waiver that was received from the Federal Department of Agriculture. We are one of a handful of districts, at least in this area, who's doing that. Most other districts are still just staying with free and reduced families. We went an average increase. We averaged previously about 200 students that we were feeding. Right now we're averaging about 900 or so. So a dramatic increase in the number of meals that we are providing. And again, the meals are being provided on Mondays and Wednesdays. On Mondays, it's 2 breakfasts and 2 lunches. On Wednesdays, it's 3 breakfasts and 3 lunches. Any child who is enrolled in the Cherry Hill School District, regardless of age. So that could be children from the age of 3 up through the age of 21.
Well, they can be, so our younger children may not be enrolled, but it's any member of the household that's under the age of 18. So if you have a younger sibling that's not enrolled yet, they can come. And also our private school students, our VOTEC students, anyone who has students living in town participate.
And it's standard meals. If families need vegetarian, they can always request when they arrive. If there are concerns or questions, they can always ask. High School East, High School West, Barton Elementary School, 10 a.m. to 12 noon, Mondays and Wednesdays, for sure through the end of the academic year, through June the 17th. We are waiting to see what the Department of Agriculture says about summer. And if we are able to continue doing it during the summer, we will continue to do it during the summer as well. Talk about a list of, we do not have at this time a list of confirmed projects that are going to be done during the summer. We've done a great deal of ADA work, accessibility work in the school district, from hard surfaces and fencing over at Cooper to renovation of stage and stage areas and the installation of lifts where they were needed in a number of schools. Work in the old auditorium and the new auditorium over at High School West. and additional site work. We have a lot of work that, we know that we would like to do. Some of it we are holding off on based on, waiting to see what the money looks like when the money comes through from the state. Any projects that must be done so that we can provide access to any of the schools are being done, right? That absolutely. These are additional projects of additional places, additional areas, additional things. But we do not yet have that. We've budgeted for a lot of hard surface work to be done in the district. We will not start doing that over the summer, though, again, depending upon what it looks like from the state. Governor Murphy last week in one of his addresses to the state mentioned school budgets being crushed. The word crushed in quotes is the word that he used. So we are trying to be fiscally responsible based on what we are doing. Remember, we put into the budget and we actually shifted some monies coming out of capital outlay, to do all security cameras in all of the schools will be done. Swipe card access in all of the schools will be done as well.
And the vestibule.
And the vestibule at Beck Middle School, which you all just approved tonight, those specs being submitted. And then the question that came through about school events and PTA meetings on the same night as board meetings. We do the best we can, and the schools do the best they can to limit overlap of events taking place on the same night as board meetings. I think the PTA does as well. I think there have been some challenges right now just because of the time frame with what's going on. And we, Mrs. Wilson typically every spring sits down with the secondary school folks and then the elementary school folks and builds out the entire calendar for the year. We try to stick to that as best as we possibly can and not to have overlap with the board meetings. And one of the most basic things is we don't want people to have to choose whether it's board members who are serving the community or family members who want to be able to see their children because there's a conflict of events. Still can't guarantee that we will always be able to avoid it. We'll continue to work with the building-based folks to avoid it at every possible cost that we can.
Thank you.
I think that's it. And I talked about lunch already, so I don't need to add anything there.
Okay.
That's all I have.
Great. Thank you. Okay, so if there is nothing else, then Mrs. Neary, could I please have a motion to adjourn?
Yes.
Okay, all in favor? Oh, we need a second. Mrs. Matlack, can I have a second?
Second.
Thank you.
Yes.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Okay, if not, the meeting is adjourned. Thanks for joining us this evening. Have a great night and stay safe.